Okay. Hey, good morning. Thanks, Melissa, for joining this morning. I appreciate everyone's
I'm glad to
attendance
be
too.
here.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we're happy to have another discussion here, kicking off July 1st here with a really exciting topic on how machine learning and artificial intelligence can help patients. In this context, we're discussing the 200 million uh, or under vaccinated children around the world, really due to COVID. And Analytics for Living and Data Prime will share today our approach on how we're utilizing our tools and solutions and open source to deliver machine learning artificial tools to improve health, innovation, technology, and really help 200 children get vaccinated, which is a significant feat.
Yeah,
Perfect.
huge topic, and I cannot believe it's already July 1st, James.
Yes, I
Beginning of the
know,
month already. Uh,
right?
so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Great. Perfect. So our objectives today is to review the AI tools and identify that or under vaccinated children in countries, as well as at the subnational level within the country and potentially within the geographic regions. So first, to start off, we'll say disclosure, right? The views here are the opinions of Data Prime and also Analytics for Living. They're not from opinions sponsored by any other client or other prior companies that we worked for as well. So quick disclosure on that. We're going to first start off with the introduction of myself and Melissa, and then discuss kind of the problem statement really around the 200 million children that are under vaccinated. Discuss what's recommended so that we kind of have a base on really what's recommended for children's vaccinations. And then talk about the call to action. There is already an active call to action, but the approach that we're taking of how we can support that. Then we'll discuss some of the analytics living services and Data Prime's AI services as well, and see if there's any questions they have. Perfect. So to jump into next point around quick introductions, I'm James Mansfield. I lead the Analytics for Living, which is an organization that applies machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve health, innovation, technology growth, and also financial stability. Also the lead at Data Prime, to support their AI initiatives. And I have 25 years about that experience in life science, consumer packaged goods, financial services, and most recently at Merck and also GSK. Also spent a significant amount of time in the vaccine space at Merck. My email's there at the bottom. Also, you can find me at Data Prime too as well. So Melissa, if you can go ahead, great.
Thank you, James. My name is Melissa Wheeler. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at Data Prime. My education is in HR and in leadership, and I have over 20 years of experience in both corporate and agency recruiting. Most recently, I was at AWS, Amazon Web Services. I have a full understanding of corporate challenges, and I leverage my experience to hire and consult all levels of technical and data professionals. So that's a little bit about me, James, and I'm happy to be here.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. So let's jump into topic here then. Okay, so I'll start off a big number at the top, right? 228 million, right? What does that mean? 228 million are the number of vaccines that really were not distributed to individuals around the globe. And they are primarily children. And these are roughly 228 million that are at risk for diseases such as, measles, right? Yellow fever, polio, these types of diseases that you wouldn't think are common. Well, now there's potentially 228 million that, have a risk for this as well. So it's a quite significant number. So I think the question you may ask, well, how are you talking about 200 million versus 228? Well, let me walk that through. So if you think about the 228, there are some vaccines there that are for adults. If we look at pneumococcal disease, for instance, recommended in children, but some adults, also capture that. So the 200 million is really a good picture of kind of the number of children that could be impacted or need to get a vaccine. So why is that a big number, if you asked, right? It is maybe every year, right? 200 million children are not vaccinated, and unfortunately, it's not the case, right? I'm going to walk left to right on this slide, and if we go back, if we look at the first line there on the top of the table, in 2019, so this is pre-COVID, there's typically about 20 million children that are not vaccinated. It's very unfortunate. There's about 116 million children in the world that are eligible, but around 20 million do not get their vaccines. Could be access, could be political instability, could be campaign or other things, could be a pandemic, right, within a country. But essentially, it's about 20 million. Then when COVID hit, a lot of the vaccine programs were disrupted, right? So what that occurred then, where an increase of patients not vaccinated because they couldn't get the vaccine, couldn't have access, went to 80 million. So there's a study done by the World Health Organization, UNICEF, that said about 80 million in 2020. Because we're very passionate about the space, we continue to kind of keep on track of that. Another study went out in the beginning of March, April, and said, and it was just reported the end of April, it's now up to 200 million, right? 228 million are not vaccinated and 200 million. So if you think about that, we step back, right? The amount of unvaccinated, typically unvaccinated or vaccinated children is 10 times, right? That's 10 times what it used to be, right? In terms of significant. And you say, wow, why are what programs are disrupted? What are those? Well, typically you see in 2019, I'll go to that next line here, the disruption of vaccine programs, roughly you see about 15% that just maybe did not occur, or they were canceled, or like I said, some of the other reasons, a variety of different reasons is there. And that's where machine learning and AI could help too as well, but that's kind of the pieces. When COVID hit, roughly you see around half of those, even up to 75% of those vaccine programs were disrupted, right? So that's what caused the 80 million. Now we even continue and look forward here in March and April, and we're seeing 37 to 50% of those vaccine programs are not occurring. In turn, that's what's increasing the number cumulatively as well. And then I think the next question we ask is, well, why, where, right? Where is this happening? And typically you'd see in 2019 about 15%, right, are those countries roughly is where that do vaccinate. That's the ones that were kind of disrupted. If we look at 2020, just to get an idea, there's about 114 countries out there that potentially were having disruption of vaccine programs, right? If you think of just MMR, right? Measles, mumps, rubella, right? If you're in the US, like us, you're like, every child gets that for the most part, right? Well, you're seeing about 27, countries that children that are born, they're not receiving that. Fast forward into, 2021, and we're seeing about 50 countries, right, that are affected, 50, right? So it's not so much it's decreasing, it's still increasing where it's disrupted. What's really interesting, we'll go to the next couple slides, is how do you impact this, and where do you impact this, and where are these countries? And in that 50 countries, roughly 50% of those countries are in Africa, right? So we stepped back and said, okay, can we look at the data? Can we look at the analytics? Can we understand if this is true, right? How many potential, vaccines were actually shipped, right, from a warehouse standpoint? And if you are familiar with vaccine manufacturing, right, it takes 2-3 years to make a vaccine, right? 2 to 3 years to make a vaccine. So these have a long runway, right, from the time that UNICEF says, hey, I want that many, I'm going to buy them, right? I want them shipped, and I'm going to keep them cooled or in a warehouse, right? So, when UNICEF, I think when they gave these numbers, they said, well, we have all these vaccines still in our warehouses, right? And roughly in 2020, they said that they only really distributed 2 billion, right? So it's a big gap, right? It's about 280 280 million vaccines that were not distributed, but it's definitely a significant problem. And that's why I have this number here, 228 to 280 million. That's not so much patients, right? It's kind of fully vaccinated because you may have 1, 2, or 3 doses, for a variety of vaccines.
So James, is UNICEF the only deliverer here?
It's a great question. Yep, it's a great question. And I think you're saying is UNICEF the only one that may implement those vaccines? And I think that it really comes back to the health system. I think there's no health system that's similar to another health system in all the countries, right? That's the one thing. They're all different. So when you look at all the countries around the world, 187, 190 countries, they all have their own little different healthcare system or nuance for that, right? In some cases, if you look at real industrialized nations like the US, for instance, well, Japan, Europe, right, like the UK, France, Germany, right, they'll have government-funded vaccination programs where they're kind of implementing those in the countries, right? And that's for the most part is, that's one way where they're delivering. Like in the US, you may have your health system or even Walmart, right? You can go and get a vaccine. But if you go outside of that, let's say the mid-tier countries, right, in terms of industrialized, like Brazil or Mexico, right, or even which are fairly progressive, right, or even kind of the right, or underdeveloped or undeveloped countries, right? They don't have that infrastructure. They don't even have the funding, right, to kind of buy the vaccines and get those, right? So essentially, the vaccines, the 2 billion vaccines, it's funded through a foundation. It's funded through a grant. Because the World Health Organization and UNICEF, the Bill Gates Foundation, and a variety of other organizations want to really help and improve health, right? And how can you improve health? Well, let's stop diseases, right, that can be curable. There's about 20 diseases that can be cured through vaccines for children today, right? So not every country gets those, but that's kind of how they are distributed. So when you look at who's the, distributor, well, UNICEF is one of those for probably the underdeveloped. There's a couple organizations that kind of fund that, but mainly the people on the ground that are kind of doing the vaccination, maybe the health system, kind of a broker for UNICEF, or UNICEF themselves that's putting people in the country to kind of implement those. But great question though too as well. Thank you. Thanks for asking that too. That's great. So I know you may say kind of, well, what are the immunizations? What are we talking about here? Is it just one or two, right? And it's not just one or two, right, of these vaccines. So this is kind of the list of recommended immunizations for children. Left to right, I'll go forward in terms of priority. But for most of the countries that have that, there's roughly about, if you add the numbers, about 20 vaccines that UNICEF would actually distribute. Depending on what the region would be, they may or may not require or recommend that, right? So if you're Japanese encephalitis, well, not every country is going to say, hey, do that, or tick-borne encephalitis, right, or typhoid or cholera, right? It may not be the case. Dengue, for instance, right? But if you get to most of the ones on the left, like Hep B, polio, DTP, measles, mumps, rubella, varicella, right? All of these, for instance, and mumps, are very common that most countries would provide those, right? Varicella was a little unique. In Latin America, none of the countries fund varicella, nor does UNICEF. So you have kind of a lot of patients, children, that die because of chickenpox or are hospitalized, right? And you think about, that's crazy, because in the U.S. that's been vaccinated for a long time. But if you go to, say, Latin America or something, it's a little bit of a different story. RSV is another one too, right? In the U.S., only patients that or babies, I should say, that are born premature are eligible, right? If you wanted to have your child get vaccinated for RSV, well, you may have to pay for that, right, if they're not premature, right, or have some other respiratory symptoms. So it really varies about some of the countries, but this is the kind of solid list. HPV, very interesting. The World Health Organization puts a recommendation that they want 90% coverage for children that are born. Well, and typically that's done around 9 or 10, right? So they'll have a lot of school systems. So that's kind of a new trend. Pneumococcal here is also a new trend for children. That's not as common, but it depends on what country you are that's there in terms of these vaccines. And the picture on the left, right, is just some children here. I love that baby crying at the bottom there, which is, I'm sure we've all experienced this. I think my daughter, I've seen, she made the paper once for one of her screams. So it was definitely funny for vaccines.
And James, are
Oh, yeah.
these vaccines typically covered in certain countries? How often are these vaccines covered? Right, so not only in the U.S. but in countries that have massive numbers of people that are infected.
Sure. Yeah, I think in countries that so if you think about, here's the recommended, right? Let's talk about that, right? But then you go to the country and say, well, we don't want to vaccinate our population for, say, varicella, right? For instance, so the country, the health system, like COFEPRIS, right, in Mexico, for instance, will say, well, we'll pick and choose kind of which ones, right? And then they have a goal in place, and typically you'll see, remember that 15% I said, roughly, you'll see about 85%, 90% of that, if they do have a program for UNICEF, 85%, 90% of those children in the country would get vaccinated, right? So when you think about the numbers we're talking about, it used to be 15%, now it's only 50%, right? It's a big difference, right, in some of those countries when those vaccine programs are there. Covered is, if you're in Mexico or these other countries where UNICEF comes in, it's not covered. There's no health plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're in, Brazil, for instance, you may see, 90% of the population that has public health care, right? Of which the public healthcare system doesn't pay for these vaccines, right? So how do they get that? Well, UNICEF comes in to say Brazil, right, and implements that in a school, and then children go to school and then they get vaccinated, right? That's how typically you'd see that done. Or there'd be a vaccination clinic and you'd see the long line. I think I have a photo of that of, some children in line getting that as well.
Okay.
Great question though, too, as well. That's good. So what's the impact, right? As I said, 85 to 90%. Why are we talking about vaccines? Well, pre-COVID, vaccinations prevent about 4 to 5 million deaths per year. It's 4 to 5 million children deaths per year, right? And that's with roughly about 85% of those countries who do that, right? But when you have, this next bullet, vaccination program significantly suspended, right? You have that children at risk developing those diseases 10 times more, right? So it's almost like a 10x, right? So if you're saving 4 to 5 million, lives per year, well, now, you have 10 times the number of patients that are not vaccinated. Well, that number of deaths really could be much, more than 4 to 5 million. Hopefully not, right? But certainly that's kind of, the risk that you have. And the waterfall is there's about 280 million, less vaccines delivered, 228 million under vaccinated, and then 200 million. And if you kind of walk around just to here, I tried to pick a couple different regions. Like if you look at, say, North America or the U.S. and other places, kind of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, right? They're just children, right? They don't know,
Mm-hmm.
right? They don't know about what's going to happen, right? So I think that UNICEF and the World Health Organization and the pharmaceutical industry really do a great job at kind of putting this forward where there's not a lot of profits per se on this, so that it's really about doing the right the good thing in terms of their
James,
patients.
I have to say this is it's in white, so it's a little hard to see, but this is pretty massive. These numbers are massive.
Right.
So
Yep.
it looks like it says and tell me again, because these numbers here, is it 280 million less vaccines were delivered?
Correct. Yep. 280 million less vaccines delivered in 2020. That's right. Since in 2020, 2021. That's correct. Yeah. And and also growing because you have 50% of the 37 to 50% of the program still suspended.
Those
Right.
are
So
huge
that
numbers.
so is every year you have new babies born, right? The year before, those children are not vaccinated, and the year after, right, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's definitely something to kind of address, right? And it's a big, a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, obnoxious goal. But that's kind of why we're here at Data Prime and Analytics for a Living. We think we can help here, so which is great. So the next slide is just kind of what's the vaccination gap, right? What's the trend on this? And I guess the first piece was, around like a supply chain, like how can you address it, kind of like the problem space. This next piece that I wanted to share was around, and this is real data, right? It's from the World Health Organization, from UNICEF. I had to do a little bit of manipulation, a little analytics too as well to kind of understand this. But if we go left to right, right? So if we look at the vaccination gap, roughly what I'm saying here is if you look at the vaccination gap of that 2019 pre-COVID, of those 20 million, right? Where do the 20 million fall? Where do the patients fall? And roughly it's in about 10 countries. 60% of the vaccine gap is in these 10 countries in the red that's on the left, right? Okay. So if you think about that, right, if in 2019, here's where you'd want to target, right? And even I know we go to Mexico, I know we go to Brazil a lot on vacation. I love Mexico too as well. And you're like, whoa, that's a place where there's a vaccine gap, right, for a lot of issues, right? If we flip fast forward, this is real recent data. It just came out at the end of April, right, May timeframe. So it's very recent. Analyze 2021 by region, right? Now we see where that disruption's taken place, right? Pretty much all Africa, right? Half of the patients, right? Most of Latin America, including Mexico, few countries in kind of, Middle Eastern Asia as well. They're a little bit lower, but if you wanted to step back and say, kind of, how do we make a bigger impact, right? Or let's say polio, for instance, or measles, right? How do we keep a measles outbreak from happening? Well, what if it starts in Africa? And it runs and then it goes rampant, right? Look at what happened with COVID, or even Latin America, if we look at varicella or chickenpox, right? These are kind of the things that need to address because it could have a global impact. for those. But if there was a place to focus based on what we saw in the data, Africa, Latin America, maybe some, so in Europe, where you're going to get roughly 50 to 60 or 70% of the patients if you focus on a region. Now, not every country is going to be open arms to do that, right? Or because of COVID and so forth. But that's kind of like what this point is, to say that it's one thing to say, okay, how big is the problem, right? It's big. Which vaccines are going to save the most lives? Where? Kind of, this is the the point piece that's there as well, is kind of the next point on this. If we fast forward, just to reiterate, and I know I said it again, but the patient needs roughly over 280 million, right? The patients that need a vaccine is about 280 million, and it's not a demand, it's not a supply issue. The supply's there, right? You think about the lead time; it's been 3 years, kind of make these vaccines. They're there. We think it's an analytics problem. We think it's a more of a machine learning, artificial intelligence problem to go after and say, let's look at Africa, Latin America country, which ones did not get it? Who had restrictions? Who had the programs canceled? Where was the gap? Kind of, how can you target it, right? And that's where big data, analytics comes in place. So definitely significant. And this is the pictorial, right? If you went into a country, I think, Melissa, to follow up your question, who's given that vaccine? Well, in this country, I think it's a country in Africa here that I grabbed that picture from, but it's a UNICEF kind of delegate, right? Maybe most likely from the country that's kind of managing on behalf of UNICEF that vaccination program. They're waiting, babies to get their vaccines, fill out the form and so forth to get their vaccination record. But that's how it's happening for them. If you say, well, back to our point about what type of data do you need to do this, and does it exist? Because I'm sure someone says, no, the data doesn't exist. And that chart that I just had a couple slides ago, right? We just pulled that data and ran that and organized it. Now, great, we have a lot of content expertise, deep expertise in this area, right? Having worked for a few areas, but you do need a lot of data, I think the answer is, to answer this question, right? And I think that's the complexity. And that's why machine learning and AI can really help here, right? If we go to the left on vaccines data, what data is needed? Well, one is vaccines data. Program status is the program, right? But the World Health Organization, UNICEF, Gavi, and the countries kind of all publish data. The tricky part is it's not in one database, right? So what you're seeing is you have to combine it to analyze it to understand where the gap is, right? Because it crosses those spaces, right? We'll add more complexity of, well, which vaccines, right? Where are the records? Can we look at patient level data? Like, for instance, in Mexico, even though someone gets a UNICEF vaccine, it's captured in the Mexico Secretary de Salud, place to kind of see kind of where that's done. So you can actually pull some patient level data, and a lot of the countries report that. But again, it's different from the first pillar. Still needs to get integrated the second, right? Supply chain, another key piece, right? So the supply chain of World Health Organization, UNICEF, right? That's where they're saying, hey, this is how many is in the warehouse, right? But if you wanted to say, well, let me understand where things did go, well, that's another database. That's the shipments of the database, right? And if we look at shipments, and I have prescription invoices or prescription warehouses, right? The pharmaceutical companies aren't alone either, right? When they ship product out to World Health Organization, UNICEF, it becomes an invoice, goes in their SAP system. It's a different database. It's not recorded as sales per se. It is, but you have to go in and see how those were shipped, right? So that's kind of the piece where it's another data set to combine. Tenders is another piece that's, we do a lot of work on, of understanding where there are bids, right, for other vaccines. Now let's add in COVID, right? Very complex, right? About where's the rates, right? What's the test? How many patients are hospitalized? Where are the restrictions, right? All this data exists, all in different databases though, right? The reason why machine learning and artificial intelligence works is we can take all these kind of components, the four kind of pillars, and there's probably more, but these are the four that we felt that are most important to answer this question. And then we could build feature importance, right? What are those key features, right? So we can validate it, report it, measure it, and build those combinations to understand kind of what is learned, kind of where that opportunity is to impact lives. And then as those feature importance are built, we can run AI that kind of then says, hey, let's learn from this and then report that out. The reporting is really unique because we can then say, like back to that chart, well, within this country in Africa, within this geography, vaccines went here. They didn't go there. And here's the program that was canceled. Now you can target, right? And here's how many lives that would be impacted, right? So that's kind of the approach that we kind of laid out around the data. And I'll go through to the next slide on this too as well, just to check it on the time. Here, I get a little passionate about this topic. But that's kind of the approach. So where do we start? I think one was, as I mentioned, it was patient lives. Was saying, well, what's the best benefit? The second are countries and regions, right? We can identify those countries or regions. The third, right, is vaccines. Validate that need and then set those KPIs, to learn to really get to that, 200 million. So this algorithm works, right? We found that it's worked. We've definitely done it in other areas, and we think it's a good algorithm that, whether it be open source or a fiscal project that we can support, on behalf of Universal, something that's a great place that we can support. And to kind of bring that together before we kind of jump into kind of recommendations on here was, just walking left to right. We know it's a big problem, right? I won't go through this again. We know that we can answer some of these around the vaccines, the patient, the supply chain, the COVID, and so forth. And then we could deliver that out in terms of reporting to answer those questions. So this map on the right is really that map in the beginning. But if you wanted to target, our recommendation would be probably just starting coming to the, the biggest impact, which would be, the region of Africa and then Latin America, including Mexico. And the bottom is where the pictorial is. It's not just UNICEF. It may require, some of the, shared military or government resources around the globe to kind of impact that. Because if you vaccinate someone in, say, Africa or Latin America, right, or if you don't, right, well, whatever they, are, as we saw with COVID, it could come to America too, or come to US, or come to your country, or UK, or Europe. So it's something that the government's definitely is a good idea, and that's some of the recommendations that they have to kind of follow through on that. So our recommendation would be on here would be that we employ these vaccination machine learning and AI tools, right, to identify the vaccine, the patient, the supply chain, the COVID, and then the features. Run those tools to help the World Health Organization, UNICEF, to implement and vaccinate those children. There's one large program that's implemented, is an Immunization Agenda 2030. I think that's a lofty goal, right, to get to 90% coverage for those patients there. And I think that this something needs to be addressed now versus waiting and trying to build over the next 10 years to kind of get there. And I think that AI machine learning can maybe help and expedite that. But that's kind of the program and target that's there too as well. So perfect. I know we were tight on time, and I got a little carried away there, Melissa. But but any questions before we kind of get back into Data Prime? Let me just see if there were any questions popped up. No. Okay. Cool. So then just to wrap up on and share time back to Melissa here would be Analytics for Living. I mentioned that we have a significant vision to try to help and support life. This is a great problem to have. In terms of offerings that we have, I think one area particular in this is it's called a fiscal sponsorship project. Right. It's one of Analytics for Living's foundation's kind of initiatives around fiscal sponsorship. So the concept here would be that if this aligns to our mission, aligns to UNICEF's mission, and if they wanted to support that, they could certainly fund that project that we have through a grant or otherwise to kind of for us to implement that. The other approach we have is definitely open source, for some of our tools that kind of help enable those pieces, and then we of course have teams and people where Melissa's going to talk about the support. So Melissa, if you could give a little bit about
Data Prime, absolutely. And if we can just leave the slide up, because it's a good intro here. And we at Data Prime are a group of recruiters and experts, developers. We have data scientists in-house that help bridge the gap between the people that we need, the top talent, and the solutions, scalable solutions for your company. So we're a full cycle recruiting partner from the very beginning, the initial assessment to hire, and we use our AI analytics or algorithms to match skills and experience and a lot about the background to fully match that up to what the businesses are needing. But if you can move on to the next slide for just a moment, I would like to share that this is our data scientists have really created such a great story and being able to help people understand COVID. Yeah, this is perfect, James. COVID and how we're able to provide some really good information to help make some good decisions. And just last year, and I just want to give you a little bit of background on data scientists. Last year, per LinkedIn, there have been a 650% increase in data science jobs
Wow.
since 2012. So that's a big one. It's a needed everywhere. And as you can imagine, with Amazon, a lot of the larger companies and Google are using the information to predict data and to predict solutions that companies should have. And this is in 2026, the prediction here is that that's going to increase year over year 28%. So there's a huge demand for data scientists. And there is a really big need to have people come in as data professionals, data analytics. And this slide here gives you a little information about the services that we provide at Data Prime. We have a full platform to invite data professionals to come in and understand what a data scientist does. And there are assessments, there are different resources within the platform, and I'll invite people to come in to dataprime.ai. Data Science Services provides digital transformation from start to finish for companies. They do resource scaling and data insights and augmentation. And they also review capabilities and gap assessments, like I mentioned. We also have the data professional recruiting side. And the first box here that's listed is flexible people solutions. And that just means that we provide temporary, full-time, permanent people that are needed for various projects to fully understand the data and to help businesses make good solutions. Mention the algorithm that we use, but we also use both AI, machine learning, ML, and also our technical partners to fully understand what a company is needing and the gaps that they have in talent to be able to match them up to some good data professionals. But this is just an overview of what we do at Data Prime. But also just a lot of information on data scientists. If you come to our website, you can take a look at what we do as a whole.
That's great. Quick question for you, Melissa. Thank you for sharing it. With that increase of 650%, right, of increase, how are companies handling, recruiting for data scientists, and how does Data Prime kind of, do it differently or meet that need, to kind of help them?
Sure. So data scientists are needed, and 70% of large companies and companies in general are looking for data scientists. So, and just a few years ago, it was all about the software developer, some of the technical positions that companies wanted to hire. And now there's such a shift to having data scientists, data professionals in general, fully understand the data that's coming into companies and how they can use it. We are building a platform, building a community so that our data professionals can communicate and have a place where they can ask questions of each other because they are professionals in their industry, and just really unite in the community a group of people that we can call on for different opportunities to understand how they're able to kind of share their level of expertise. That's one thing that sets us apart, I think, from other people, from other companies. But we also leverage our data scientists in-house that we have. So we have data experts. We have Dr. Kirk Bourne that's in-house that we can also leverage, which is an influential speaker within the data professional world. So it's really around the community that we've been able to create, the information and experts that we have in-house, and also our technical recruiters, just to come up with a way to consult our businesses and really guide them through the services that they might need.
That's great. Definitely with a big need, for through COVID and so forth. Definitely, good background, and definitely meet a need for a lot of companies. So thanks, Melissa. That's excellent. Well, I think we'll bring back to just contacts. My email's at the bottom there. Melissa, if you want to share your contact too as well for
Yes, yeah. So you can look both of us up on LinkedIn. We're on other social media as well, but LinkedIn, or you can email us. We've provided our email below. So mine is Melissa Wheeler at dataprime.ai, and just connect with me. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well.
That's perfect. Great. Great. Well, I thank you all for joining here today, and really appreciate the time to discuss this really impactful topic, right? When you think about 200 million children, right? There's 10 times the amount of unvaccinated that it was, 2 years, even only 2 years ago, right? It's a big, or a year and a half ago, it's a big problem. So as well. So, and I hope you'll continue to kind of participate in these. We do have a couple sessions that are coming up for us too. So just a quick commercial on some things, right? We did talk about mental health this past week. We had teen suicide. We have a couple other topics on PTSD and criminal justice. We are going to also do a replay here, our teen suicide, with some new data that we have. We're going to try to do that next week for some of the participants. I know there's a lot of interest on that. So if you missed it, stand by. We did talk about Alzheimer's this past week. Had some great topics on there. Welcome to participate. Multiple sclerosis was another topic we had this past week. And then COVID and mental health, right? We closed out the Mental Health Awareness Month with COVID and mental health that we went through, and then the vaccine one that we talked about. We are going to drill down in the vaccines. You'll see more in the future. Just one around RSV and pneumococcal and varicella, a couple business cases we're going to talk through in some countries and regions. Definitely exciting if you have some interest there. And the last one we have is the modernization of technology, right, for health systems. In the light of all the new technology, right, it's time to modernize. And we have a good solution here for that. So I'll jump back here and say thanks all for the conversation today, and look forward to seeing you on the next one as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.